here, coach or Coach L with Freedom Running Club. We are here to talk about the importance of recovery. With me being a physical therapist and Kyle being a running coach and all of his experience with athletes, I think it would be fun to talk about the differences that on the rehab side with recovery versus like on his side when someone's kind of in the midst of their training. So that's what we're going to hop into now. Kyle, thank you again for your time.
Absolutely.
Um, so yeah, let's get into it, and I'll kind of share my thoughts too. It obviously very different with when I'm seeing someone who's getting back into running, or during their training and an injury pops up, versus what your experience has been. So yeah, tell me your thoughts on recovery and why it's important.
Yeah, definitely. And I know I'd mentioned this in one of our previous videos. The biggest thing that you really have to get people to understand when they're doing their running training is you actually don't make yourself better as a runner in the run. You only make yourself better in how you recover from that run. We actually weaken ourselves every single time we do that. And then based on how we recover from it, the amount of time between training stimulus, what the intensity is between these two, all the little things between then and the next, 23, 22 hours, whatever it is the next training run is going to be. That really dictates if that made us better or if it actually weakened us and puts us in a path of being under recovered. And
Mhm.
that is just as important. If you go and you have a really, great long run, but then, maybe you overdo it the rest of the day, you don't refuel properly, you don't manage the stressors, you go and do something maybe too intense the next day, all those different things, you can take a fantastic workout and derail it by just putting yourself in that overly fatigued, under recovered side of things. And I think that's where a lot of times people could even reframe it in their mind. Sometimes people might think that they're overtrained. They're typically probably under recovered when it comes to it.
Mhm.
The training, it's not, easy to go out there and run however many miles or minutes or whatever it is you're doing, or if you're throwing a workout in there or a race. That's not easy, but your body's pretty good at, when given the right time, recovering from it. And that's where I think that people want to look at all these different things because it's not just about, what you're doing on a training day, what your week looks like. Obviously, you wouldn't want to put too many really strong stimuluses together. Following a good training plan, obviously, is a big part of that. Making sure that that day you're doing the right amount. But that recovery piece is so critical, and one of the facts that I think is really underlooked at is in how people refuel from that. There's I know a lot of people have talked about, that anaerobic window when people talk about how quickly you should be getting protein. Really, some of the newer evidence on that really shows that that window is pretty big. Something like 6 to 8 hours is the most recent studies that I've looked at. Most people are going to have eaten within 6 to 8 hours of their
Mhm.
run. In the most part, they're going to get some kind of fuel. A big thing that you really want to look at too is trying to get those carbohydrates in. It looks like the window of opportunity to really take carbohydrates and store it as glycogen, which is kind of what we want, is a little bit shorter. The evidence is still really mixed, and I think it's really kind of inappropriate to say what that window is in terms of time, where the anaerobic window has been studied a little bit more. But really, I think that it's getting yourself to get some good fueling is the first step. Making sure you're getting a good cool down in. People usually think about that, maybe getting a good stretch in to kind of bring your core body temperature down, bring heart rate down. But having a really great post workout, carbohydrate, protein, and fat composition can really help speed up that recovery process. And I think that a lot of times people don't think about that. They think about what their next task is, getting home, maybe showering, getting to work. When are you getting that fuel in so that your body can really properly use that workout? And that's more than just a sports drink. You definitely want to have protein in there. You want to have carbohydrates. You want to have fats, good ratio of all those different things. And a lot of times you really have to plan for that just as much as you have to plan out for that run. You
Mhm.
might have something in your car. You might have it already made the day before if you're going right to work afterwards. But really setting yourself up for success really does come from, I think, looking at that. Again, don't just go right from your run straight into your car and drive off. You want to spend some time, maybe doing some strides, maybe doing some more cool down stretches, depending on what you did that day. You have some different ways of managing that. But having some fuel, some good fueling options that you're willing to eat right afterwards, I think is a really critical point in speeding up that recovery process.
Mhm.
And that's kind of the most immediate thing that you can do. Um, I think that obviously probably the biggest thing is sleep. Sleep is the biggest neglected thing in our society. It's really kind of people are really sort of incentivized to have maybe a little bit less sleep, burn it at both ends, those different things in terms of the candle. And, you know,
Mhm.
sleep sometimes gets deprioritized. And geez, there's so much of your adaptation, so much of your recovery happens when you're not just in sleep, but, deep sleep, quality
Mhm.
sleep. So I always think about, typically people have a little bit of time between the end of their run and when they're going to sleep. So I think first of that fueling. But having some separation between not only your run, but everything else that could be stressful, your work, your everything else, having that time frame to really get yourself ready to sleep, you're going to get most of your adaptation in your sleep. How you can recover from that, getting into a deep sleep, making sure that, you're not staring right from a computer screen and trying to go right into deep recuperative sleep and making sure you're giving yourself enough time. You know, the normal human needs, in that working age, anywhere from like 7 to 9 hours. Everybody's a little bit different. When you go to sleep matters. But, if you're training for something like this or recovering from an injury, fueling, sleep,
Mhm.
that much more so. And I'm sure you've seen a lot of those things with the people that you work with in terms of, sleep might be a little bit off, and fueling. But those are the first two things that really come to mind for me when you're going from a training run of some kind. How are you refueling? How are you actually getting yourself ready to then sleep and recover from that so that you can get up and do it again and actually use those adaptations? Are those fairly similar issues that you see with the people you're working with in terms of recovery and rehab?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I think sleep, nutrition is always something to talk about, right? I always bring that up, but those are the things I ask about. Definitely what's going on in their life, stressors, like you mentioned, sleep, nutrition, just how their days set up. But on the rehab side and healing too, sleep is huge because that's when your body really needs to like focus on healing and good quality sleep, like you had mentioned. With working a little bit more on your postpartum side too, a tough that's always a battle for me and obviously for the patient because of a baby and children that are getting up in the middle of the night, and how can we balance, that your family while still getting to sleep and also training. So, and you can't make anyone do anything, right? You can only kind of tell them what your thoughts are. But trying to let them know if you just don't feel great in your run or your workout, and you did not get good sleep the night before, maybe it's time to push it till later and rest or to the next day. Um, so I would say sleep is definitely a huge one. In addition to fueling, I was helped out at a race this weekend, a half marathon in Chicago. There are a lot of people who are um, getting ready for Chicago there, and the ones was talking to the group of the Pacers, which is like an interesting team that obviously helps everyone stay at that pace. And um, talking about nutrition, and I would say majority of people said they do not eat carbs. And me just meeting these people, I can't really put my like within 15 minutes tell them you need to, it's recommended to do this, right? But that is what I tend to see the most from people is they cut out carbs because I don't know why. At some point we thought protein was what we needed all the time, and carbs get like put on the back burner. So I always just check with everyone to see what exactly they're not what they're eating, but like what is kind of your relationship to food, what's your breakdown. I just kind of let people talk and see like, okay, what are they getting a lot of, right? And tends to be a lot of veggies and protein. And it's different for men and women. Do you provide any guidance for your like women runners versus men based on like how what to get nutrition wise.
Absolutely, yeah, and I'm glad you said that because I think that these things go in cycles. I'm old enough to remember, protein and fat were the devil when it
Hmm.
came to your running goals, and it's shifted the other way. I think that right now, protein is really kind of gotten overemphasized. It's super critical. That's how we recover from things, but how we fuel that is carbohydrates. It's our preferred fuel source, and I don't know how it became trendy to think that people feel like they don't need carbohydrates because your body can kind of sort of manufacture them if you've gotten to a carbohydrate depletion. It's not really carbohydrates. To me, that shows how important they actually are, that your
Hmm.
body can kind of go through ketosis if you're not in that means we really need them if it can figure out how to manufacture them. But carbs are how we fuel fast activity. That's your body's preferred fuel source. The way that I always, when people might be a little scared of carbs, is your brain pretty much primarily uses carbohydrates. Part of the reason why we are forced to slow down in races is you're getting low on carbs. It's not that you're out of it, and your brain is kind of it's greedy. Your brain is the fastest thing. If you think about how quickly your brain can do things, it's pretty much using carbohydrates all the time. And
Hmm.
so I really tell people, like, when you want to go fast, you need carbs and how you recover. Your muscles are fueled from it. So you can't just rebuild muscle from protein. You need the carbohydrates. That's how your body really kind of fuels it.
Right.
And so absolutely. It's kind of gone through that shift. And, you know, my training through National Association of Sports Medicine through sports nutrition coaching, it's still very clear that 45 to 65% of our calories should be from carbohydrates. And the higher percentage of that should be what people who are doing endurance athletics really comes into. And then yeah, there's those things are pretty similar between women and men. There are some differences. It seems that women are better at metabolizing fat as fuel sources at slightly faster intensities. It's part of the reason why it seems that women can get closer to male performance when it comes to aerobics. So the difference between the world records percentage wise for the longer distance races is closer than in those shorter distance. And when I say shorter
Hmm.
distance, I mean 5K, 800 meters to go even shorter because of the speed power aspect of it. So there's some differences there, maybe even in how much a woman might have a little bit more ability to have different types of fueling just a little bit, and I mean a little bit, where they can metabolize fat a little bit more efficiently than men. But really, what it comes down to for women is the amount of iron is really kind of a critical piece, and it's kind of a twofold thing that I see with women when it comes to that recovery. We should definitely do a full thing on fueling and all of this, but iron levels, women tend to be much more often women are vegetarians, which is the much more readily available iron sources, heme iron versus non-heme iron. Things like calcium can block the absorption of iron or a lot of it from plant-based sources, where
Hmm.
the animal sources of iron can definitely be much more readily available. And women need about twice as much iron on a daily basis as men. Very rarely are women getting that amount of iron. And so that where some of the being tired can come from. The symptoms of being low in iron are typically feeling tired, low energy. That's a pretty common thing, we're talking about here with recovery. But whenever I hear that, like, if somebody's really feeling lethargic, if it's in particular a female athlete, I get my iron levels checked on an annual basis, sometimes every 6 months. If it's lower because aerobic exercise churns through iron, that's how your red blood cells are made.
Hmm.
You actually have more blood with aerobic training. That's one of the training adaptations is more blood in your body. But being up on that because I can be low in iron as a male athlete. Female athletes obviously use more iron than a male athlete. So really kind of looking at that and making sure you're getting enough iron can be a big part of that. That does tend to come from animal sources is going to be protein, but you can get that in other things. Your green leafy vegetables, great sources, tomato sauce, and a lot of other sources can really help that, especially if you have someone that is a vegetarian. You really have to be careful about that because it's super easy to get low in it. But
Hmm.
yeah, the training and the fueling definitely needs to be kind of honed in when you're looking at that because of how important fueling the run you're going into, but then recovering from the run you just got out of. All of those things are really, really, critical to look at. And you brought up something else too in when you were talking about, when do you know when to not finish a workout or when to delay a workout? And you talked about being at a half marathon race this last weekend. I did a 10K race this previous week and then followed up a 10K race with a 21-mile long run to get ready for Chicago. And I'm feeling a little fatigued this week. And we were chatting just a little bit before we started making this video. I had a workout this morning that I did 75% of it and decided that's enough. It's going to go downhill from here. My heart rate is high. My effort level is
Mhm.
too high from what it should be. I'm only going to get diminishing returns on this point, and my recovery from this is going to be so long if I finish this workout. It's just not worth it. Let's call it. There were some other factors here in the Tampa area. We had a beautiful 82-degree day that's at 7:30 in the morning. So that was something else
Oof.
that kind of led into it. We have something down here called a fake fall or faux fall, and we kind of had it for a couple weeks. It was beautiful. It was like 70 degrees in the morning, which I know is hot for most places, but for here it felt glorious. It was back with a vengeance today with the heat and the humidity. So, knowing yourself, knowing, what the intensity should feel like, working with a good coach can help that, but just knowing what the effort level of a workout should feel like. It was supposed to be a hard one, but it was going from like an 8 to 10 out of 10. I felt like I was doing a race again. So just call it short, live to fight another day, come back tomorrow with a recovery run, and be ready with some of these quality key workouts before the Chicago Marathon, which I have here in about two months. Knowing when to move on and go to the next, workout the next day. We talked about this in the previous video. Also, if you just know it's not going to be there from the get-go for whatever reason, you had a really
Mhm.
hard day at work, didn't sleep well, maybe in your situation, like you said, you woke up at all hours to take care of a new baby or anything like that. Better to do a recovery run today so that you can reset for tomorrow. That's almost always going to be better if you just feel like you're not going to be able to get that run in. And so all of those things kind of stack up to where just kind of knowing what your body feels like, making sure you're giving yourself that proper fueling. But yes, absolutely knowing when it's just a little bit off. And we haven't talked, we've mentioned stressors, but not so much. I know that we talked about this in a previous video too. That's that area of stressors. That's something that I tend to really kind of, if people are telling me work is bothering me, I'm not sleeping well, but I know that we talked about in a previous video this idea of the levels of stress and how it can kind of manifest itself. Can you kind of like take us through that when you're dealing with a client too, and when you see that stress might be an issue?
Yeah, sure. I mean, with I guess we'll keep it with running specific. If they have a running plan and they're trying to get back to obviously whatever that goal is, or just getting back to running consistently, um, rehabbing from an injury. It all depends on kind of what's going on in their life, right? If they're like you said, have all those stressors. So, you know, mentioned prior about that graphic from Chris Johnson, physical therapist out on the West Coast, that I show runners just to kind of see where they are, with the kind of that green light, yellow light, red light approach to training for that day. If you're just at pretty low readiness, you haven't had sleep, you've had a lot of stress that day, is this, a time that you should be completing that workout like you had just mentioned? Is it a workout that's manageable? There's some stuff going on, but potentially there's nothing that is really going to lead to possibility of an injury, more of that yellow light versus like you feel good, workouts matching up to kind of how your night has been and how your day is going. Green light, move forward and continue with your training. I mean, that's been super helpful for me, just to be able to show people something like that. And it's great you put that together so that it's an easy way to say, hey, where do you feel like you are? And show people like, okay, well, we're in the red. Let's maybe talk through that and see if today's a day that you should be doing a workout. It's a little different, obviously, with communication on my side, like how often I'm checking in with people. I do follow up with people at least once a week because sometimes I don't see them until every 3 or 4 weeks because they're doing well and I'm just progressing their strength routine or depend or just keeping it the same depending on kind of what their running goal is. So I'll check in every week. If they have a coach, then I'll make sure I'll try to link arms with the coach too, just so we're on the same page there. Um, but definitely checking in with them to see kind of where they are. A lot of the times people reach out to me, and they say, "Hey, just this is bothering me more," and then I dive into what's really going on that they're struggling today or this week. And then we start talking about things a little bit more. But thinking about that, I think it would be good to maybe take this to my patients at the start of their rehab of like let's follow something, something along these lines to make sure that you understand when it's time to take a break and when it's time to continue to move forward. Because I mean that is tends to be when I see people on the rehab side is that they've pushed too much. We talked in the prior video with intensity and or deadlifting too on like a awful night of sleep and you've deadlifted the weight you've always deadlifted and that time you just hurt your back, right? Because you just weren't fully there and ready for it. Um, so yeah, I love using that. I think it's very helpful for my patients. And then, on the with that like return to run, I try to space out with the run strength so that you're not doing everything obviously on one day, but also have a day in between your runs so that you can really monitor how you're feeling. So it's different, right, with rehab versus like your run coach because hopefully by the time people are to you or they're toward the end of their rehab, so they're back training, and my goal is just to get them to you. So how can we do that? Can we monitor symptoms by having a day recovery in between each session while building up time, miles, and then starting to stack days as they can, and then starting to add intensity. So I would say a little bit of a different approach. You definitely have a lot more of the nutrition side than I do. Hearing you talk about that, I always tend to we have a great sports dietitian here in Indiana, and I just recommend they see her for some sessions because I just don't know all that stuff. I mean, I see her myself, so um,
Yeah, and full disclosure, obviously, I'm not a dietitian. That's a super like specialized degree. You have to go a master's in that, and you have to get recertified. I just
mhm,
have your very basic, like, if we're looking at what you're eating, what might you be low in, what are the symptoms that you're having, if that's an aspect of it. But yeah, definitely for everybody watching this, dietitian is definitely who you want to look at. That's a very, very specific medical certification degree that you have to get. A nutritionist, I can call myself a nutritionist, and it's why I always say through NASM because anybody can certify someone to be a nutritionist if they want to, so it's not nearly as regulated. Two very different things there, but yes, absolutely. A dietitian can give you meal plans. They're basically a
mhm,
doctor of nutrition, essentially, and for lack of a better term, because they have so much more, training they have to go through. But and it's also going back to the whole piece about communication. I'm lucky because I can message my people on a daily basis, and typically that first thing is, "How are you feeling today?" Before I even would dive into, sometimes it's very like very cut and dry. They had a very, solid long run or recovery run or anything like that. And I'll jump right into, hey, I saw your data. It looked fantastic. It looks like you hit your paces and intensity was right where it wanted to be. But I almost always tag that with just how are you feeling or how is it for you
mhm,
today? Because the numbers are going to be one thing, but I might see something totally different from or get something totally different from the athlete and actually kind of unpacking that from them. Like, maybe it was a battle when it didn't look like a battle from their numbers, and he, honing in on that communication and then having that, they're much more likely to share like, yeah, I was able to do it. It was great, but you know what? I was on 5 hours of sleep. I'm feeling a little fatigued. Oh, thank you for sharing that with me. Let me go ahead and just program in a couple of easy days here to make sure we get back to that baseline level to where you're able to do something like this because Usually if they're, at least for me, if they're bringing me an issue, it's probably been there for longer than it should have been. I have one person in particular that I almost only will hear anything from them if something's already kind of manifesting. And I don't
Mhm.
want that to be the case. So I have to really kind of be really jump in it and know my people a little bit more so because most of the people I've worked with for a good little minute. But getting to know those people, at least on the coaching aspect side of this is somebody who will absolutely tell me they're going to be very upfront if something's not feeling great, or this person is going to try to hide it a little bit. They're still not quite to the point where, they're going to say if something's going on. So I have to be even a little bit more in tuned in those people of, is there something off with their data? Did they not hit their last two reps? If they share their sleep data with me, which some of them do to where I can see it if they're wearing their watch on a regular basis, am I seeing some downturn in terms of the amount of sleep or something like that? So a lot of different things that are in there, but the biggest aspect of it is just making sure that you're balancing all those different things. If you're
Mhm.
asking a lot out of your body, you can't really come to it with a stressed out, situation. I know that some people might think, oh, you can go and take out your frustrations on the run. I mean, that
Yeah.
might work in the short term if you're not necessarily training for something, if you're just going out to try to take some physicality into something. But if you're really training for something, and for long term, you can't really take it out on the run, for lack of a better term. You
Mhm.
really do have to hone in, what's going on. And stress is a little bit harder to manage, right? Like you could do a food log with somebody and figure out if something's a little bit off. You could do a sleep log with somebody and figure out if something's a little bit off.
Mhm.
Sometimes these people are just such A-type personalities too that they don't know
Mhm.
what relaxation is, you know? They're used to going from a 9 to 5 to, picking up kids from here, there, and squeezing in a run whenever they can and everything. And those are the ones that you really kind of have to make sure that you're not doing too much because quite often if you take some of that stress off, do some easy work here and there, you'll see their performance just increase for the next little bit because you were able to successfully manage that stress, allow their body to actually use the training that they're given, and not overtax themselves and everything. So with
Sure.
a lot of that, we're talking about everything in between training. Obviously, like I was just saying, don't take it out on your run, obviously. Don't make your easy run into a 10K PR or something like that just because the day was stressful because, it's going to take days and maybe a week to get over something like that. But yeah, managing these different things, proper refueling, proper sleep and managing stress. I think those are three really key things in making sure that the recovery is there. One thing that I do like to always ask my clients is it's just like, what do you do to relax? And the amount of time I get people that don't even have a strong answer for that.
Mhm.
And when I say relaxation, I don't mean just, sitting in front of the TV, watching Netflix or something like that. What is something that you can really go to and feel more recharged afterwards? Is that a daily meditation? It's something that I really believe in myself and works well for me. Is that a journaling? Something that you can really kind of get out what's going on throughout the day can be really helpful. It doesn't help me so much, but I've had a lot of clients that have a lot of success for that. Is it something that's just very like something you can really mindfully do, like playing an instrument, drawing, reading, something that you can really, maybe it's an educational podcast that you can kind of like unplug from everything else and kind of get your fixation on something that's really interesting to you and really unplug from the rest of anything else. Podcasts, super great when it comes to that. You can do them almost anywhere and you can really sort of unplug from anything for it, as opposed to, obviously it's super relaxing to just sit on the couch and watch, some television. But what is something that you can really do that afterwards you feel like your battery has been recharged? What is that
Mhm.
activity for you? And finding that I think can also sort of help with managing that stress. That can be cooking. That can be really just anything that's very mindful so that you're taking yourself out of that stress of thinking about maybe work or worrying about something that's really not going to be super productive. Give your brain a break from those things. That can really help, I think, manage with stress in a lot of cases too.
Hmm. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think when young kids come into the picture, that's why I think people fall apart a little bit there. With, yeah, like you said, busy schedules, running around and just trying to fit a run in. I'm just thinking about when you were saying that, like what I do, myself. And in the perfect world, right, I would love to get up in the morning and go for a 5 a.m. run, but my son got up at 2 last night in the morning, and then there's that loss of sleep, and it made more sense to sleep till 6 and then get up and then find time, after I drop the kids to go for a run. Probably not as long as I would like it to be. Um, but that is, yeah, life happens and kind of rolling with it. Um, I was thinking about that when I was driving my kids to school. I listened to a podcast yesterday and he was talking about what are the if you could list like 3 or 4 things to do in a day that really help, or in a week, whatever it was, that like if you could get those done, then you feel like, life just is in balance, and just maybe balance isn't the right word, but you just feel better having those couple of things. And I was thinking about, I was like, if I could sleep at some point and um but just balancing out, just making sure even if it's disrupted, that I'm prioritizing sleep, make sure I am eating, which has been, I think, very much a challenge with kids in the picture, myself, because you're taking care of them and you forget yourself. So making sure I eat and then run, because I just love that. I mean, I love meditation like you. I try to fit it in 5 minutes maybe, a couple times a week because it helps. And then, yeah, do something you love. So it could be small, like, you had said. And for me, I think connecting with friends, something like that is very helpful, and just catching up on those relationships there. So, yeah, I mean, it's a lot to think about when you're thinking about you just want to go run, right? But it keeps you away from those injuries. I mean, it's not a perfect recipe to prevent anything from happening, but it will help to push any chance of like injury out of the picture if you can hopefully get just be mindful of how you're feeling and how the night went and how you ate that day and how work was.
Yeah.
So um yeah, I would say that's always a hard conversation with, just when people come to me, they want the physical therapy side, and they want, okay, tell me how to fix this. And then when I start talking about all those things, depending on the person, they're okay with it or they're not. So, um, and then that just is taking a couple sessions to really understand the person and try to work with them on that. So, but it
Yeah.
definitely goes a long way for sure.
It's funny, like I think there's different things that you can kind of also build in. Obviously, life happens, but one of the big things that I started doing within the last year is I had a treadmill that I hadn't been using for the longest time. I would always just get up and go to the park, and I was like, if I 2 days a week just plan on the fact that I'm going to do one or two of my easy runs on the treadmill, I'm going to get an extra 30 minutes of sleep, an extra hour of sleep each week. And here in Florida, get out of the heat a little bit when you
Mhm.
can, and just kind of like almost something to look forward to. I think that that can also be helpful too, to plan in some of those things. You have to respond to, your kid got up at 2 in the morning. That's something that you couldn't plan for. But I think that, even if you plan in some of those, deloading, or however way that you do it to help with that, that can be again a sleep in day in particular. That can be just a day that you plan in particular to run after work on the treadmill, as opposed to trying to find a way to do it outside. Things that you can almost like look forward to with that. That can
Mhm.
take a little mental stress out of it as well. And it's funny when you did not exactly in the same way, but the idea of like the general client. I'm working with somebody right now who I'm getting her ready for their military fitness test, which is a 1.5 mile test,
Mhm.
really big thing. And they were dealing with some different scheduling things, work, school, all these different things, college students here. And basically we had a couple of days that I had pushed a workout out, and then looking at it I said, I don't think this is the best thing. It's probably too close to the next one. they've got one of their military fitness tests coming up in a couple days, and I want to make sure they're more ready for that. And the person said, like, well, isn't it going to make me a killer if I can do this, like in a funny way, like if I can do all of this? And I said, it's probably not. It's probably going to end up, jokingly, it's probably going to kill you more than anything else if we do all of this. So I think that a lot of times people left to their own devices, again, we've talked about this, A-type personalities, they're going to
Mhm.
do potentially too much. And we go back to kind of where we started with this. It's almost never that you're doing so much. It's how are you recovering from all these things? If I had let this client do this workout so close to another workout so close to their test run, one of those
Mhm.
things wasn't going to be there, and it might very well be the 1.5 mile test that they have coming up, which was the third thing in a row. That was then went all the way down. That's probably where the recovery was going to happen. Really kind of getting ahead of that when you can, but when it does sort of get a little bit top heavy with anything, recognizing the signs, pulling back a little bit. If you're working with a coach, a professional, a PT like Julie here, kind of talking with them about how to make that work, but all those different things we've talked about, it's not as simple as this is what you do today, this is what you do tomorrow. There's nuance with all of these different
Mhm.
things. And, you know, coming up with, those general strategies more so than solid rules when it comes to these recovery. If you're following most of those strategies, you're going to be in a better case in most of the situations that you have to where you're not going to get into that state to where you have to take a full week off, or hopefully, an injury doesn't come up. Obviously, there you can't be 100% on it, but those different strategies of your sleep, your fueling, how you're managing those stresses, coming up with those strategies can definitely be super helpful.
Definitely. You had mentioned the treadmill, and this got me thinking because this is something I think about, and I'm sure other people think about this too. Some people love training on a treadmill, some people hate
Hmm.
it. Um, with and I was thinking you're in Florida, I'm in Indiana, so it's our humidity is not like it is. I'm from the East Coast, so when I
Right.
go back to the beach, I'm like, oh my God, this is a lot different. With running and being out, and I'm just not used to it anymore. And I guess if you had a race that was in your state, you're probably well acclimated, but probably a little more used to kind of the temperature at that time. Um, so would you typically recommend, like, is there a difference between someone who stays on the treadmill, maybe because it's easier with life, versus like going outside and just having the elements and allowing yourself to adjust to that? Is that something you kind of build into a program?
Yeah, definitely. And a lot of times it can be for the elements. That's more of a necessity sometimes if you see something happen. And I work with clients, and we've talked about this, Connecticut, Idaho, Wisconsin,
Mm-hmm.
where if it's negative 20 degrees, we're not probably running outside today, of a necessity.
Sure.
But a couple
Yeah.
things you can just do to make it more similar to outdoor running, putting it on a 1% incline. It simulates the force of having to push through air, which is something people don't really think about. When you're on the treadmill, you're not dealing with that. You're pushing through the actual air and the elements, wind that can be happening. There's actual, it's a little bit harder where you're on the treadmill, you're pretty much staying in place. So putting it on that 1% incline, you're not going to notice it so much, especially if you do it all the time. But if you go from running everything completely flat on the treadmill to outside, it's going to be a much harder transition
Mm-hmm.
if you do that. I would say that, making it work for your schedule, if you're somebody who is having to get up and go to a gym to do your runs before work, that's a necessity. When you do have your weekend runs, try to plan those to be outside so that you're getting a little bit of each of it, because there is a difference, right? The pounding on most good treadmills, if you're someone that's going to a gym that has a nice setup, it's going to be much softer, less impact, to where if you went out and ran maybe a half marathon or full marathon, your muscles might not be fully adapted to the slight changes, cracks in the road, the crowning of the road, just the mere fact that the footing is going to be a little bit off. So mixing it up, it depends on the person's situation. If it's just absolutely during the week, I can't do anything but on a treadmill because of my work schedule, that's their situation. Let's just make sure we're building in some good outdoor runs when you have the ability to, so that you're still getting used to the elements. But yeah, setting it on a 1% incline, I think, is something that not everybody necessarily knows about. It's not super secret information. That's been kind of some protocol for a while, but definitely you want to put it on a 1% incline to simulate the force of pushing through air to kind of help with that. But in reality, if it's going to be, a 90-degree outside run versus a nice 70-degree indoor treadmill run,
Mhm.
you're probably getting more out of that treadmill run because of how quickly you're going to be able to recover from it for the next day.
Mhm.
If I'm going to have to go and just spend the whole day, with electrolytes and keeping my feet up and just not really being able to fully use that outdoor run, then it really wasn't worth it either. Kind of going back to something I mentioned in one of the previous videos, that today should never compromise tomorrow.
Mhm.
Um, and if the choices are get up and run on a treadmill before work or run after work and it be rainy or hot or overly cold and you're really increasing the amount of recovery time, now we're not really getting what we want out of it either. So it does really kind of depend on the situation in terms of the timing, what your situation is, what the weather is like, what you're doing. There are some workouts that a treadmill just won't work on. Typically it's a workout that I call fly 30s or like alactic training, like really quick, short burst. The treadmill is just not going to be great at that. So
Mhm.
you want to plan things like that at different times. But I've had people do hill workouts on a treadmill. They can go on an incline if you absolutely
Mhm.
need to for one reason or the other. If you're not going to be able to get it in, I'd rather adjust it and figure out how we can get the most out of your training. Maybe put the something that's maybe not as critically important, like a good race pace workout or something where you're really trying to feel what the race elements are going to be. You're not going to be able to simulate that on a treadmill. Kind of like we said before, it kind of does depend, but I think that's some pretty good protocol to put into place. 1% incline, make sure you're still doing some outside, but playing that, am I losing more than what I'm gaining by doing this inside versus outside and vice versa?
No, I think that makes sense. I mean, I went for a run last Friday and it was really it was hot here and humid and ended up walk run. I just didn't feel my heart rate was just up more than it should have been. Um, but then I ran this week yesterday outside and it was felt okay, but it was still the humidity was up there and it had rained a lot. And then I felt good today and I was like, I'm just gonna. It was raining here. I was gonna just hop on the treadmill, and I actually felt really good today. But knowing I didn't sleep well and all those things, I feel like I feel better inside anyways because you take away everything else. But yeah, I think pushing through in heat, extreme temperatures like that, like that's a good point you made about it just making you feel not great for next day or two. So better to run it indoors, or change up your pace outs, whatever the workout is, like you said. So that's an interesting point.
Yeah, it's going to be a little harder running outside for the different reasons. It's less controllable, but the
Hmm.
heat, building up that heat, that's probably the biggest limiting factor when it comes to aerobic performance. We don't run the marathon at 1 in the afternoon for a reason, right? If it didn't matter, we could just schedule it whenever. Um, but a couple of things just logistically with that, women do tend to deal less well with heat than men. I know
Hmm.
that it's sort of a something that people say that men sweat and women glow. It's kind of sort of a little bit correct. Men tend to
Hmm.
sweat more than women, so it's more effective cooling as long as you don't get dehydrated. Women tend to actually, if you've seen, often women might get a little bit more red-faced when they're running, and that's because tend to put more the blood kind of goes closer to the skin, which is less efficient cooling and actually means that the blood isn't going where it needs to be for aerobic performance. So that's a very much a generality, but women tend to deal a little bit less well with heat than men. Um, and so that's a real key indicator with it as well. And there's another side benefit that you can also get from treadmill running that you can't get outside. If you have a mirror somewhere around you, you can also check your form in a way that you can't.
Hmm.
I actually had a younger athlete that I was dealing with this just form and mechanics, and they didn't know what they look like. I might film them here and there, but they couldn't see what I was saying. So on a treadmill, if you have a mirror somewhere around you, which if you're in a gym, there's typically mirrors all over the place, you can also do a real good form evaluation. What is it looking like when I'm running? And something that you can't do outside in any way, shape, or form unless you're running by a window that's reflective or something, or you
Sure,
kind of
sure.
see your shadow. But yeah, so there's again, there's keys why you might want to do one versus another for sure.
Yeah, no, yeah, that totally makes sense. And on the just thinking about everything you said, obviously it's case by case. It depends on the person.
Yeah.
I think over the years I've been a physical therapist. I think in the beginning I used to try to throw everything at someone. Now, especially a runner, I try to keep it as simple as I can and make sure like, hey, can you do this? Like, is this going to work for your lifestyle right now? And I've had people say like at the beginning, like I'll do whatever, and then after we've been working together for a little bit, we start getting like out of that acute rehab phase and moving into more training, but they're not out of the woods yet. Then I'm like, okay, what is like gonna happen after we leave? Like, what can you actually continue with? And typically they'll say like, this is yeah, the less I can do, the better, as because you're getting back in the running, and then that person's gonna continue with you, right? So like, how can I make it as simple as possible for that patient to not add stress to them. So, yeah, I think have we touched on everything? We got
Cover a lot of ground, yeah.
yeah, I got the nutrition side, cooling down, warming up, cooling down, actually cooling down with recovery. I mean, I think the last thing to touch on, I don't people recover the way they want. I don't typically tell someone they need to go to get this device or go sit in an ice bath or those kind of things. Maybe it's different on your side, just because I always just find that people kind of have what they like to do. People will ask me if it's okay that they do those things, and I say, whatever works for you. If you want to go get a massage, if you want to go do this thing, like, it's totally fine. I don't like work them into my routine or into like their plan. But that would be the only thing is like recovery tools, whatever the individual likes and have used, and can recommend if they want, have questions about it. But outside of that, pretty
Yeah,
minimal.
yeah, definitely. The best recovery is what makes you feel better for the next one.
Mhm.
I think that obviously a cool down run can help flush out, the lactic acid, which is funny. I think that people think that lactic acid lasts for days. It lasts such a little period in your body that, you really want to get that acute fatigue out, that waste products. And that comes from like a cool down afterwards, gentle activity. And it's funny, the stretching and everything afterwards, people think that that prevents injury. A lot of times it just kind of helps your heart rate, excuse me, come down a little bit more gradually, makes your core body temperature come down a little bit more gradually and get back to homeostasis, which is really what we're trying to do afterwards anyway, get back to that baseline of not being fatigued. And
Mhm.
that can look different for everybody. I have protocol that I recommend just from what looks well or works well. But if I'm like, if you want to add a couple extra stretches in or whatever, that's totally up to you. That's great if it makes you feel good. And then I have people that, they have those devices you put your legs in and they do the massaging, people like
Yes.
that. People like Theraguns or the mechanical massage guns,
Hmm.
rollers, different things like that, compression. There's all different things. The science on all of those things, ice baths, like you were saying, the science on a lot of those things for one being right is super mixed. I think that it comes down to, again, what makes you feel like you're speeding up that recovery process in terms
Hmm.
of those other things outside of sleep, pretty clear. We need, that amount of
Right.
fueling, pretty clear. We need that amount of fueling and everything, and same thing with the stressors. But if you have something that really works well for you, do it. I like when I'm feeling a little bit more sore or anything like that is I might do like a warm soak. Epsom salt tends to help me just a little bit when it comes to that. But I think that's almost more the relaxation than probably um
Hmm.
the actual mechanics itself of Epsom salts and everything. I know that after my last marathon in June, it was actually like I did some cool to heat, so the contrast therapy. I've only do that after longer races, but yeah, for sure. It really comes down to what feels best for each person. I think is much more important than anything else. And if somebody said, they want to go and run a 5K race the day after their marathon because that's the recovery, we're probably gonna want to do that. But
Yeah.
yeah, these recovery tools, they're all about increasing blood flow, reducing stiffness by getting motion into the area. That's a really important thing. for all of this, the massage, the compression, all those things to try to increase blood flow to speed up recovery. And what works best for most people, I can make different suggestions based on what they're feeling on what to try. But if you say, do this, that, and the other 100% for every single person, it's not really super supported by any of the you'd think that ice baths would be 100%. We'd know, do them or don't do them. It's been studied for years.
Hmm.
It's still very, very mixed. If it makes you feel better, let's do it. If it doesn't make you feel better, let's find something else that kind of helps with the recovery process.
Yeah, yeah. As long as you take time to recover, for
Yeah,
sure. But
yeah,
get those other things, at a good place. So,
yeah, exactly.
well, awesome, Kyle. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah,
I
my
appreciate
pleasure.
your time, and hopefully you're recovering now after that run and getting
Yeah.
ready for your next one. So,
Yep, two weeks and a couple days to Chicago, so excited for that. But yeah, definitely prioritizing here in the taper stage that recovery because that's way more important. Should have said this before, but at the end of the season, if you are in that, well, the reason why it's so important is it's like baking a loaf of bread. All the hard work with baking a loaf of bread is at the beginning of the process, the kneading and the rising and everything. Right now, I've got it. It's in the oven right now, and all I can do is mess it up by doing too much. So that's that's where my mentality is with it. So
that's a good reminder.
yeah,
Train smart, recover smarter, maybe.
there you go. Yeah, absolutely.
That works. Okay. Well, until next time.
Absolutely. Yep. Take care,
All right.
everybody.